Okay, so now what are the partitions that we can create for a Linux system? Typical home setup is going to be like this, fine. And if you are a new Linux user, then most probably you will be keeping your Windows with you and working with Linux also. So now we have this free space, and in this free space we would be creating partitions. So what partition should be created for this? Let us have a discussion about it. Linux can utilize multiple different type of partitions to store its data, and for home small office use we recommend different kind of partitioning, and for server grade systems we talk about different kind of partitioning. Okay, so here I'm just going to talk about the simple partitioning for home or office usage, simple small home office usage, where your typical usage is like programming, surfing and all, or even you could be using the machine for some simple web development and other kind of work, but it is typically not being used as a web server or actual server connected somewhere on the internet. Okay, so let's have a look at what would be the recommended scheme for this. Okay, so here is a scheme that we can actually use for home purpose. Fine. So since it's going to be a EFI system, we will create a EFI partition. Technically, you can use the existing EFI partition, but if we look at it, it's like quite small over here, and there are different suggestions that you can use the existing EFI partition or should you create a new EFI partition. So it's best that we are going to create the EFI partition. So in case of Linux, the EFI partition what would we want to create would be around 200 to 500 MB. The point is that if you're going to do multiple Linux installations further, then we would want it of a bigger size. Maybe 1 GB also you can give if you have enough of space, but with respect to our virtual environment we are going to keep it from 200 to 500 MB only. And if you have too much of disk space, you can give 1 GB easily. The file system that we are going to use for it is going to be FAT32, and the mount point is going to be boot EFI. Fine, this is /boot/EFI. Then we are going to create a boot partition which will be 500 MB to 1 GB. This is where your Linux kernel and other things will reside. The file system we are going to use on this is ext4, and the mount point is going to be /boot. Okay, then there will be the root partition under which the whole operating system is going to stay. This could be from 10 GB to 50 GB depending upon your requirement and space available, but somewhere around 10 GB is required so that you have enough of space to install each and every application, and still you have some free space to work around with it. So this is going to be again ext4, and slash would be the mount point of it. This is the root. Then we need to create a home partition, and the home partition is going to have space for each and every user inside the home. So home partition size actually should be the maximum size, because that's where everything is going to be stored from the user. Fine. If it is typically going to be a multi-user system and all, then it can be calculated on the basis of number of users and the space that you want to give to the users. So it could be like 1 GB per user, and you're going to have 10 users, then somewhere around 10 GB of space. But generally, if you are the only user for your home use purpose, so give it the maximum space that you can give. And finally, there is a swap partition. So swap is a concept which is like extension of RAM by using the hard drive. But today everyone has enough of RAM, 4 GB, 8 GB. So typically the swap is not used. But still, we usually create a swap space, and the traditional thing was that you create the swap space double of your RAM size. So generally we don't do this anymore. We create a swap space equivalent to the RAM size or a bit more than that. Typically it is required if you want to do suspend to disk kind of thing, hibernate to disk, these kind of things, that this kind of stuff is required. So let's create these partitions for our purpose, and let's see how it will look. Though the recommendation is that you create these partitions when you are installing Linux itself, and then we are going to see that demonstration again. So this is the first scenario where I'm going to create a new partition that is going to be uh, what we had discussed. Let's keep this information handy over here, and we will stick to this particular information, and we will use this for creating our new partitions. Fine. So that thing. Okay, so we have this here. So the first thing we want to create is the EFI partition, and let's make it 200 MB. New size would be 200 MB, and the partition name, we don't want to give the name. The mount points and all actually will be done when the Linux installation takes place. So we are going to, just for the demo, I'm just going to make this as FAT32, and let's just give it, name it uh, as boot EFI, just for understanding purpose. Okay. And actually there are some flags that can be set on the partition, which we'll do it later on. Fine. So this is there. We'll add partition. So you can see we have a new partition that has been created, boot EFI. Okay. Then we are going to create another partition in the free space. We'll create a new partition, which is our partition name. We'll keep it as boot. This is going to be ext4. Okay. So, and the boot partition, we're going to keep it as around 500 MB. Okay. uh, let's add this. Then next is we want to create a root partition. So we'll create a new partition on this, and we still have 19 GB of space. So let's give it around, let's say 9 GB to the partition. We'll keep it as ext4. Let's add that space. Okay, so let's next create the home partition in that unallocated space. So now we are going to make the home partition of around let's say 8 GB. Fine. So, and the partition name, I'm just going to give it as home, and it is going to be ext4, and let's add this partition. So now the remaining space I'm going to allocate to RAM or the swap. So we'll create a new partition, and here I simply have to select this as Linux swap. Just name it as swap. Okay. So these partitions are now added, and we'll just say apply, and our partition will be created over here. Okay, so now you can see that all the partitions are created, our Microsoft Windows partition as it is, and our partitions that we created are now given the device names SDA6789 and so on, and all these partitions are there in order. Now when I install Linux, I could use these partitions again. Fine. But then this is only for demonstration. In every Linux distribution you will come across some tool during the installation which would be similar to this, and where we are going to create these kind of partitions during our setup. So that's a basic partitioning scheme for home office usage. Fine. In the next video we will discuss partitioning scheme for the for a server grade kind of a thing. For just an example, we are going to discuss it in the next video.